Phil Trapp sipped hazelnut coffee from a Keurig coffee maker as he scrolled through the list of emails sent to him since the bank he worked at closed the previous evening at 5 o'clock. There were 105 letters on the list, but he knew that about half of them were complete junk and had nothing to do with banking. How many emails can this fucking gecko send every day? He thought thoughtfully. Maybe it was the coffee, or maybe it was the fact that it was Friday morning. But Phil was in a cheerful mood. He glanced at the clock on the wall. There were 6 hours and 53 minutes left until the end of the work week. Add to that a 90-minute commute, and before dark he found himself in the arms of his loving wife of 26 years, Rowley, for the first time since he left for work on Monday morning. Rowley now spent most of her time at the family cottage near Lake Tippecanoe in northeastern Indiana. She spent the last 2 summers there, and the couple decided to extend it into this summer. Phil commuted from their home in the Fort Wayne area to and from work during the week and joined Rowley on the weekends, leaving on Friday night and returning to Fort Wayne on Monday morning. Rowley and Phil have been officially empty nesters for 2 years now, since their youngest son graduated from Michigan State University. With none of the children home anymore, Rowley spent about a month depressed and alone in their empty Fort Wayne home before offering to stay at the lake cottage full-time for the summer. If she's going to be alone most of the time, she might as well live in a cottage by the lake where she can swim and spend time on the beach. Phil, of course, missed her, but during the week he could easily get by on his own, tending the lawn and doing other things. Phil and Rowley have owned the cottage for 10 years. When the boys were in school, the family spent many weekends in the 3-bedroom house. Then Jeff got his degree and got a job 2 states away, and Robbie got his degree and a job on the West Coast. It was quiet in the house and quiet in the cottage. Phil was glad his wife could enjoy the lake while he worked. He was very happy when she retired a few years ago, and when she suggested they stay at the cottage by the lake and he would come over for the weekend, he was all for it. Isn't that what a lake house is for? So they can enjoy it as much as possible, he thought. Glad you're back full-time. This will make life easier for everyone, Glenn Zom Rowley said over lunch at the lake house Thursday afternoon. It's much easier for us when we don't have to organize meetings and go secretly. It's a slight inconvenience to keep everything kosher. Rowley smiled slyly. Well, finish the salad and let's see how you like my kosher salami, Zam said with an evil grin on his face. Rowley raised her eyebrows and pretended to be shocked. Then she stood up from the kitchen stool, slowly walked over to Zam, unzipped his trousers, and reached inside. Hi, baby. Do you miss me? Phil asked Rowley on Friday as he left the bank for lunch. Yes, baby. I wasn't expecting your call, she answered with slight hesitation. She stopped moving and gently placed her hand on the chest of the man she was riding. He quickly realized this and stopped moving under the curvy blonde. I figured you wouldn't call and just meet me here at 6:30 or so, Rowley continued. Phil detected a slight hesitation in Rowley's voice, but didn't worry about it for a second. He was just glad to hear his wife's voice. I just wanted to say hi. God, I missed you. I forgot how hard the last 2 years have been, he said. Calm down, big boy. You'll be here in just a few hours, she said. I know. I just needed to hear you. See you soon, baby. Love you. I love you too. Rowley ended the call and threw the phone on the bed. Smirking, she placed both hands on his chest, raised herself up, and then lowered herself, repeating the action over and over again. Sorry for the interruption. She smiled at the man. You know how possessive husbands can be sometimes. Yes, I know, he smiled back at her, reaching up to caress her large breasts. The couple gradually picked up speed and fell into a strong rhythm for about 15 minutes before the man moaned. Oh, someone definitely missed me, she cooed. 10 minutes later, Rowley put several $100 bills in the pocket of her short robe, quickly kissed the man on the cheek, and closed the door behind him. The Trapps' cottage was the only one on the winding street. It was located a couple of blocks from the more expensive houses on the beach. It was easy to get in and out without attracting the attention of too many people. Rowley headed to the master bathroom to freshen up and get ready to meet her husband. She knew that after being gone for 5 days, she could probably leave a bad smell on her, and Phil would never notice it. He walked through the door, and within 5 minutes she was lying on her back. Still, she knew it wasn't worth the risk of being stupid or careless. Rowley scheduled dinner for 7:30 p.m. after the couple had their reunion sex. Rowley gave Phil every part of herself. She sincerely loved her husband and physically rejoiced at their union. On Saturday morning, the couple woke up hugging each other. The couple took a shower and went to dinner at a local restaurant. Several people waved to Rowley as she and Phil took their seats. Phil noted that she quickly became part of the community. "Good for you?" Phil laughed. "I wonder how many of them think I'm your father." Although Phil and Rowley were the same age, Phil knew that his wife looked 10 years younger than him and could still turn a man's head. He saw several people turn their heads as they entered the small restaurant. "Oh, come on," Rowley said with a slight note in her voice. "Not my father, although he is my older brother." Phil chuckled. "Well, when you retire too, more people will recognize you," Rowley said. Among those in the restaurant who calmly observed the couple's communication was Glenn Zahm. Arden Cunningham was a very good customer at Glenn Zahm's car dealership. He was a handsome man of about 50 who kept himself in good physical shape. At 6 feet 4 inches and weighing 220 pounds, he reminded Rowley of a seasoned athlete. Rowley was lying naked on her back on the bed when Arden returned to the bedroom from the bathroom. That was amazing, big boy," Rowley admired. "You were good yourself," Cunningham said. "Your body gives me so much pleasure." Rowley's eyes lit up at the handsome man's compliments. She ran her hand over his chest as he lay back down. It was 4 p.m. when the couple woke up after an hour's sleep. Rowley reminded herself that Phil always called on Wednesday afternoons when he got home from work. Rowley enjoyed pleasing her men. It was almost a feeling of power. That was one of the reasons she loved it. She never thought of it as a job, profession, vocation. Rowley knew she had come a long way in the past 27 months. Before she moved to a lake house for the summer 2 years ago, she would never have thought about having sex with anyone other than her husband. Glenn Zahm walked into the cafe with the confidence of a man who has the world by his ass. In his case, it was an accurate description. He was 55 years old, trim from hours at the gym, with attractive streaks of gray in his thick, wavy black hair. He was handsome in a masculine way, like Russell Crowe. As the principal owner of 17 car dealerships in Illinois and Indiana, Zahm always carried a fat wallet in his back pocket. The deputy noticed that on this Tuesday morning in May, at 10:30, there weren't many people in the cafe. There were 2 couples of pensioners, 2 single pensioners, and a single pretty blonde who looked to be in her 30s, or maybe closer to 40. The deputy noticed that the woman was wearing tight jeans and a tight blue long-sleeved sweater that showed off decent-sized breasts. She was reading from a tablet. The deputy smiled to himself. Years of experience as a car salesman came in handy when it came to communicating with people. The game has begun. He picked up his large cup of dark roast coffee and walked over to the blonde's table. "I can guarantee that I am much more interesting than what you are reading," he told the woman. Rowley looked up from her tablet and smiled politely at the handsome man. She invited him to sit at her table. "Sometimes I like the sass from a handsome man on a Tuesday morning," she said quietly. "What a coincidence. I'd like to think I'm handsome, and I really specialize in sass," Zahm said. "By the way, my name is Glenn Zahm. I live on Tippy Lake." Rowley couldn't help but smile at the man. She thought that he was not only handsome, but also had pleasant manners. She introduced herself and told Zahm that she also had a house on the lake. Zachem noticed a wedding ring on the woman's finger. This didn't bother him at all. "So Mr. Trapp allows you to leave the house alone?" he asked in a melodious, playful tone. Zahm's smile widened when Rowley explained that she had moved to a lake house for the summer. He knew that his chances of having sex with this woman were greatly increased since her husband was away most of the time. Over a second cup of coffee, Zahm told Rowley his story. He became a widower more than 5 years ago when his wife of 25 years died of cancer. She didn't seem to recognize him by name, so he decided to tell her about owning car dealerships. "Exactly. I've seen you in those corny commercials," she said. "Guilty on all counts," admitted the deputy. "But this advertising brought me a lot of money." A few days later, they met again for a cup of coffee, and a few days later, Zam invited her to lunch. 2 dinners followed. All Rowley told Phil was that she had met several neighbors. The next dinner, on Thursday night, brought the couple to Zam's large lake house. After touring the 6,000-square-foot home, they sat side by side on a luxurious couch and drank expensive dessert wine. Zam leaned over and kissed Rowley tenderly on the lips. She blushed but didn't move away. The second time he kissed her with more force, and their tongues met in Rowley's mouth. When they broke apart, Rowley looked into Zam's eyes with a confused expression on her face. "I've never done anything like this before," she practically whispered. "I couldn't change Phil." Perhaps with any other man, the evening would have ended there, but Zam was an amazing salesman and just as good at seduction. He responded to Rowley's hesitation. "We don't have to do this, but you know we both want it," Zam said softly, holding Rowley's left hand in his right. "You don't take anything away from your husband. He's not even here, so you're not sneaking around behind his back. You are an adult, sensual woman, not his property. This is not love, it's just sex. We both like sex. It is up to you." Rowley looked from their joined hands to Zam's handsome face. He leaned in for another kiss. Rowley wasn't the most experienced woman Zam had ever had. Her experience was limited to her husband and 3 men before him. Nevertheless, Rowley was full of enthusiasm and gave herself completely to him. They clung to each other, talking and kissing. Rowley was in high spirits. Every nerve in her body seemed to come to life. She was surprised that she only felt a brief pang of guilt. An hour later, they had a second round. Rowley stayed overnight at Zam's house. When she woke up, he was lying behind her, with his hand on his chest. She and Phil often woke up in the same position. The next day, Phil arrived at the cottage a little after 6:30 p.m. By 6:45 p.m., she and Rowley were making passionate love. A few minutes later, Rowley turned her husband onto his back, which naturally confused him. On Monday morning, after Phil left the lake house for work, Rowley called Zam and asked if she was okay with everything that happened and if she had a good weekend with her husband. When she answered yes to both questions, Zam asked her if she would have dinner with him on Tuesday. She did not hesitate to give him a third affirmative answer. Dinner on Tuesday ended the same way as the previous dinner on Thursday. Both participants thoroughly enjoyed the evening. Sexy evenings on Tuesdays and Thursdays quickly became commonplace. It was mid-July when Zam asked Rowley if she could do him a favor. A very close friend of his was visiting for a few days, and he was hoping that Rowley would go on a date with him. "I'm not asking you to sleep with him, doll. Andy is an old friend of mine, and I just want you to show him how to have a good time. He's not going through the best of times right now after divorcing his wife last year. I just ask you to be who you are, beautiful and charming." "Only for you, handsome," she replied. "We'll just play by ear." She winked conspiratorially at Zam and grinned. Rowley had heard all these horror stories about blind dates, but being a beautiful woman, she had never experienced anything like this. She was more than pleasantly surprised when Andy Siegfried showed up at the cottage to pick her up for a date. He appeared to be about 40 years old, had short blonde hair and large brown eyes. He was approximately 6 feet 4 inches tall, and there was not an ounce of fat on his long, slender body. "Great deal, Glenn," she thought to herself. The date went well, Rowley thought. The couple returned to Rowley Cottage. A few hours later, 2 satisfied lovers were kissing at the door. Andy handed Rowley a business card and some bills wrapped in a $100 bill. She tried to return the bills, but Andy insisted and refused to take them back. "You are awesome!" "I'd like to see you again when I get back here," he said. "Oh yes," Rowley replied enthusiastically. "Was the money your idea?" Rowley asked Zam as they gathered for dinner Thursday night. "You know that I don't need money, right?" "I know. Andy is a good guy. You had a special date." "He knows," Zam answered. "He was really funny. I wouldn't mind another date with him." Rowley smiled. Only if it doesn't interfere with us, said Zam. Oh, by the way, don't leave large sums of money anywhere. Hubby will see this. A few weeks later, on a Wednesday morning, Rowley was leaving Zam's cottage when he asked her if she would agree to another date the following week. She hesitated for a few seconds before agreeing. On condition that he is as handsome as your last friend, she said. I will never offer you anything bad, Zam noted. Rowley took most of the cash she received from Zam's friend Ronnie Gordon and went to a small bank where she opened an account after Andy Siegfried gave her money after having sex with him. She opened an account only in her name and strictly online. Phil took a week off and spent it with Rowley at the lake house the first week of September. They spent the week grilling, drinking margaritas, and making love every night. Rowley wore several skimpy bikinis around the house for a week, and Phil thought he was really lucky that his 48-year-old wife still had the body of a 20-something. Rowley warned Zam that her husband would be at the lake house all week. The deputy tried to stay away, although he really missed what he considered his Tuesday and Thursday. To make up for Zam's lack of sex this week, Rowley and Zam were together from Tuesday until noon on Friday the previous week. Rowley and Phil closed on the lake house on Monday and Tuesday of next week. Having spent the entire summer away from her usual home, Rowley was glad to return home and see her friends in the neighborhood, but she was not entirely happy about returning to her old regular existence. She knew that she would meet Zam several times over the fall and winter. Phil was delighted to have Rowley back. In addition to having his wife and lover back in his bed, he got his best friend back. Little conversations, touches, glances. He missed all of this. Phil was hooked almost from the first time he saw Rowley on the University of Iowa campus. Both were students, but Rowley had just transferred from the University of Northern Iowa. She studied English. He studied finance. He needed to fulfill one of the requirements, so he enrolled in English Literature 212, a course on women in Shakespeare's stories. Rowley took the class because she thought it would be fun and would give her an easy A. An ordinary American man, Phil immediately noticed Rowley when he looked around the class. She sat across the row from him, next to the football player. The couple seemed friendly, and Phil wondered if he had declared the blonde beauty his girlfriend. During the next class, Phil didn't notice the girl until she walked into the classroom right in front of the professor. She quickly looked around the room for empty seats and finally chose the seat next to Phil. Phil internally cursed at his bad luck because when she sat next to him, he couldn't look at her without being obvious. So he turned his attention to the window to his left and spent most of the class watching the students walking back and forth across the campus. Phil was in his own little world when he felt a tap on his right shoulder. "Class is over, genius," the blonde said. "You know, you could have gotten a higher grade if you had actually listened to Dr. Schwartz instead of following the students walking past the building. Besides, why are you following girls walking past the building when I'm sitting right here? Am I chopped liver or something?" Phil blushed, then stuttered, trying to speak until his tongue finally caught up with his brain. "At least it's gourmet pate," he said. "That's better," she said lightly. "So why didn't you appreciate me?" "Because you're sitting too close for me to do it without being obvious," Phil replied. "You know, there are rules for such things. Next time, sit a few seats further back, preferably a row lower. Then I can watch you without being distracted. Or you can take me to the coffee shop on campus and watch me right now." "It won't be difficult for me to drink coffee while you undress me with your eyes," she said, blushing. "Hell yes." Phil was inspired. The couple dated for the next 2 years, becoming intimate on the third date. Phil believed they were in an exclusive relationship, unaware that Rowley had sex with 3 other men while they were in college. Rowley knew she loved Phil with all her heart, but sex with others was more an act than love. After all, Phil didn't own her, and she certainly loved sex. The couple got married a year after graduating from university. Phil became an internal auditor at a bank. Rowley took a job teaching English in the same area. Because Phil was making good money, Rowley became a stay-at-home mom when her first child was born 2 years later. Glenn Zam waited a month after Rowley returned home to call. Experience told him that he needed to give the woman a few weeks alone in order to increase her receptivity. I'll be at the dealership in Fort Wayne for a few days next week. How about lunch on Tuesday or Wednesday? Preferably Tuesday and Wednesday, asked the deputy. Both days, Rolly and Zam ate lunch and then retired to Zam's hotel room, which was located on the opposite side of Fort Wayne from Phil's bank. The couple scheduled a couple more days to meet in a month. How about we do something with Andy? Asked the deputy. I keep my room reservation for the whole year. You guys could use it when I'm not here. Phil was not unaware that things had changed somewhat in his relationship with Rowley. She seemed more sullen and distant in the bedroom. Sex with Rowley twice a week was still great, especially since Rowley seemed to be more receptive to more positions and oral sex. But the downside was that the couple seemed to have more sex and less lovemaking. Phil noted to himself. He once tried to ask Rowley if there were problems between them, but she interrupted the conversation, telling Phil that he didn't have to go into the bedroom if he didn't like something. End of discussion. Phil wasn't entirely convinced that Rowley would spend the entire summer next year at the lake cottage, but Rowley didn't discuss the subject. If you want to spend more time with me, then sometimes come to the cottage on weekdays, she said plaintively, knowing that her husband would not want to make the 90-minute round trip from the cottage to his work more than once a week, except under special circumstances. Rowley and Phil opened the lake house in mid-May, and by the end of the month, she and Glenn Zam had resumed their Tuesday and Thursday meeting schedule. A week later, Zam arranged for Rowley to go out with another friend. As the summer progressed, Zam encouraged Rowley to have sex with several of his wealthy friends. Soon she was training with friends twice a week, with Zam twice a week, and with her husband on weekends. Her bank account from dates with Zama's friends was growing at a good rate, and she got her own credit card to buy sexier clothes and lingerie, which she hid in the back of the closet at the cottage. Given that her husband was only in the house on weekends and usually only had sex with her when they were at the cottage, she knew it was unlikely that he would ever look in her closet. From time to time, Phil noticed small inconsistencies in Rowley's actions and behavior, but because he trusted his wife completely, he never connected these actions and behavior together. In her heart and mind, she loved her husband, and what she did with other men was only physical pleasure, different from what she and Phil shared. Money never came first. Technically, Rowley knew that receiving money for sex was a crime, but she never asked for a reward. Apparently, Glenn had made some arrangements with the men he sent her. She certainly enjoyed sex with his friends, all of whom seemed to be quite wealthy and good sexual partners. Life was good for Rowley, even if the closing of the lake house at the end of the season made her dating life a little more awkward. Andy Siegfried was Rowley's first and still favorite client, provided by Zam. He had asked her to go away with him for a long weekend sometime after the summer, but she would not have felt comfortable going away with another man and leaving Phil home alone until the opportunity presented itself by chance. Phil announced that he would attend a week-long banking seminar in San Francisco at the end of March, leave on Sunday, and return home the following Saturday. Rowley wasted no time in calling Andy back and telling him about the lucky break.